Security, remove her. She's not on the list. The command didn't just echo, it sliced through the room, sharp enough to turn heads from every corner of the runway. Cameras were already rolling. Influencers were mid-live stream. A $3 million production stood frozen under white lights and expectation. And right there, at the edge of the entrance, stood Naomi Carter. No designer logos. No entourage. Just a fitted black dress and a stillness that didn't belong in chaos. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Carter. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just looked at the guard who hesitated for half a second too long before stepping closer. Around her, whispers spread like static. Who is she? Why is she here? Did she sneak in? The event director, Victoria Hale, stood near the center aisle with a clipboard in one hand and control in the other. Blonde hair sharp, posture sharper. We cannot have disruptions tonight, she said, louder now, performing for the crowd. Remove her. Naomi's eyes moved slowly across the room. Not in fear, in recognition. Every light rig, every stage angle, every face pretending not to stare. She had seen this before. Not here, not this scale, but the same energy, the same quiet dismissal dressed up as professionalism. At 19, she stood outside a boutique in Soho, told her presence didn't match the brand. At 27, she pitched a collection that got rejected before the first slide finished loading. And now, years later, here it was again. Same script, bigger stage. The guard reached out, careful but firm, like he was trained to keep things smooth, not right. Naomi didn't pull away. She didn't need to, because something in the room had already shifted. A young intern near the lighting booth leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Wait, she whispered, barely audible. But no one listened. Not yet. Victoria stepped closer, heels clicking like a countdown. Ma'am, you're delaying a show with over 800 guests and sponsors in attendance. Step aside. Naomi finally spoke. Calm. Measured. You build all this, she said softly, her voice somehow carrying further than the mic, and still forgot who it was built for. A pause. Just long enough to feel wrong. Then she reached into her bag. Not rushed, not dramatic, and pulled out her phone. One tap. No explanation. No warning. And somewhere above them, deep in the control grid of a system no one thought about until it failed, something responded. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The music still hummed through the speakers. The lights still burned bright across the runway. Victoria Hale let out a small, controlled laugh, the kind meant to reassure a room that had started to feel something shift. This is exactly the kind of disruption we do not tolerate, she said, her voice smooth but tight around the edges. Escort her out. The guard glanced at Naomi again, closer now, uncertain in a way he could not explain. Naomi did not move. She stood as if the floor itself had chosen her side. Then it started. Not loud, not dramatic, subtle. The overhead lights flickered once. Just once. Enough for a few heads to tilt upward. A photographer lowered his camera. A model waiting behind the curtain leaned forward. Victoria's smile held, but her eyes snapped toward the lighting rig. Stay focused, she called out. We are live in less than 60 seconds. Naomi's phone screen dimmed in her hand. One tap had already traveled farther than anyone in the room understood. Backstage monitors blinked. A technician frowned, tapping his headset. We are losing sync, he muttered, too low for the crowd but loud enough for the crew. The giant LED screen behind the runway glitched, a thin line slicing across the brand logo before stabilizing again. A ripple moved through the audience. 800 guests, dressed in precision and expectation, shifted in their seats. Something was off. Naomi's gaze never left the stage. Every detail of it lived in her memory long before tonight. The angles, the timing, the choreography of attention. She had built it to be flawless, which meant she knew exactly how it would break. Victoria stepped closer again, heels sharper now, the rhythm of control slipping into urgency. Last warning, she said, her voice lower, more personal now. Whatever statement you are trying to make, you are in the wrong place. Naomi finally turned her head. Slow. Deliberate. No, she said quietly. This is exactly the place. Across the room, The young intern from earlier moved closer to the control booth, her heart picking up speed as recognition formed but refused to fully land. She looked from Naomi to the flickering monitors, then back again. "That cannot be," she whispered, but the thought did not finish. The sound system cracked softly. A brief distortion, like a breath held too long. Then silence swallowed the music mid-note. Not faded, not transitioned. Cut. The room froze. Conversations died in half-sentences. A camera operator blinked, adjusting settings that were no longer responding. The runway lights dimmed by 10%, then 20%, casting longer shadows across the polished floor. Victoria turned sharply toward the tech crew. "What is happening?" she demanded, but her voice no longer carried the same certainty. No one answered immediately, because no one knew, except Naomi. She stood in the same spot, unchanged, as the system she built began to listen to her again. And for the first time since she walked in, the room was no longer ignoring her presence. It was orbiting it. The silence did not feel empty. It felt controlled, like something had taken a breath and refused to give it back. 800 people sat in that space, but for the first time, no one moved with certainty. Victoria Hale's fingers tightened around her clipboard, the edges pressing into her palm as if grounding her to a version of control that was slipping second by second. "Fix it," she snapped toward the tech booth, her voice sharp enough to cut through the quiet. "Now." But the booth was no longer responding the way it used to. Screens flickered again, this time slower, deliberate. One by one, panels across the backstage system dimmed into standby mode, as if the entire operation had been placed on pause by an invisible hand. The young intern stepped closer to the main console, her breath shallow, her eyes scanning lines of code she barely understood but instinctively feared. "This is not a glitch," she said, louder now, her voice trembling but clear. A technician beside her shook his head. "We are locked out," he whispered. "Administrative override." That word moved through the crew like a current. Override. It was not failure. It was permission revoked. Out on the runway, the guests leaned forward, confusion turning into attention. Phones that had been capturing fashion were now capturing something else. Something unscripted. Naomi Carter stood exactly where she had been, but now the space around her had changed shape. The same people who had looked past her were now looking at her, trying to place a presence that did not fit their assumptions. Victoria turned back toward Naomi, her composure cracking just enough to show the edge beneath it. "What did you do?" she demanded, stepping closer, her voice low but urgent now. Naomi did not answer immediately. She let the question sit in the air, let the room feel the weight of it. Then she spoke, calm as ever. "I stopped something that should not have started without me." The words landed differently this time, not as defiance, as fact. Across the room, the intern's eyes widened as pieces finally connected. She looked at the control panel, then back at Naomi, then at the event logo glowing faintly on the main screen. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Naomi Carter," she said, almost to herself, but someone nearby heard it. Then another. The name began to move, quietly at first, then louder as recognition spread like light, finding its way into a dark room. Victoria's expression shifted. "Not fully. Not yet. But enough." "That is not possible," she said quickly, almost reflexively, clinging to the version of reality she still controlled. "The owner is not scheduled to be here tonight." Naomi's gaze held steady. "That is because I do not need permission to attend my own event." The final word did not echo. It settled. Heavy. Unavoidable. Backstage, another screen went dark. Then another. The LED wall behind the runway flickered again, this time not returning to the show branding. Instead, it paused on a blank. White field, waiting for the next command. And in that moment, the entire show, every light, every camera, every second of what was supposed to happen next, belonged to one person. And everyone in the room was finally beginning to understand who that was. The room did not erupt. It shifted, quietly, like a tide turning under the surface before anyone dares to call it a wave. Naomi Carter's name did not need to be announced again. It was already moving through the air, carried in whispers that grew sharper with every second. Victoria Hale stood frozen in place, her posture still upright, but no longer commanding. The clipboard in her hand lowered slightly, forgotten. "That is not possible," she repeated, but the words sounded thinner now, like they had lost their weight before they even reached the floor. Naomi did not step forward. She did not need to reclaim the space. It was already returning to her. The LED wall behind the runway flickered once more, then stabilized into a clean white screen. No branding. No sponsors. Just emptiness waiting for direction. Backstage, the control team exchanged looks that said what no one wanted to admit out loud. They were no longer in charge. A senior technician removed his headset slowly, his voice barely above a breath. Primary system access has been reassigned, he said. We are locked out completely. The intern stood beside him, her hands hovering over the console, afraid to touch anything that might confirm what she already knew. She did not hack it, she whispered. She owns it. Out on the floor, guests began to stand, not in chaos, but in curiosity. Phones lifted higher. Conversations sharpened. This was no longer a fashion show. This was something else entirely. Victoria finally took another step toward Naomi, but this time there was no performance in it. No projection. Just a question she could not control. If this is yours, she said, her voice tighter now, then why were you not on the list? Naomi's eyes met hers without hesitation. Because the list was changed, she said simply. No accusation. No raised tone. Just truth placed exactly where it needed to land. Victoria's expression flickered, the smallest crack breaking through the surface of certainty she had worn all night. Around them, the pieces continued to fall into place. A sponsor representative near the front row checked his phone, his face shifting as emails refreshed in real time. A stylist backstage watched her tablet go dark, access revoked without warning. One by one, systems that had defined authority moments ago were quietly resetting themselves. Naomi lifted her phone again, not for show, not for drama, but with the same precision she had used from the beginning. Another tap. Above them, the lighting rig responded instantly, dimming the runway into a soft, controlled glow that centered the entire space on one point. The room did not resist it. It adjusted. Victoria swallowed, her voice no longer steady. You are shutting down a live event with over 800 attendees, she said, as if stating the number might bring back control. Naomi tilted her head slightly, considering the weight of that statement. No, she replied. I am stopping a mistake before it becomes a statement. The words settled deeper than anything before them, because now the room understood. This was never about disruption. It was about correction. And standing there, under lights that now answered only to her, Naomi Carter was not trying to be seen anymore. She was deciding what would be seen next. No one asked for the music to come back. No one dared to move the show forward. The runway, once designed to carry momentum, now held stillness like a verdict waiting to be read. Naomi Carter lowered her phone slightly, not because she was finished, but because everything that needed to stop had already stopped. Around her, the room had changed positions without taking a single step. People who had arrived as guests now stood as witnesses. Victoria Hale felt it before she could name it. That shift, that loss, the kind that does not come from noise, but from clarity. She glanced toward the control booth again, searching for someone to contradict what was unfolding. No one did. The silence there was different now. Not confusion. Compliance. We can fix this, Victoria said quickly, her voice reaching for authority. That no longer responded to her. We just need to reset the system and proceed. Naomi's gaze moved past her, scanning the room like someone reviewing a decision already made. You are still trying to continue something that has already ended, she said. No edge. No emotion. Just finality. A sponsor near the front stepped forward, his tone cautious but urgent. Ms. Carter, he said, testing the name out loud now that it carried weight. There are contracts tied to this show. Millions of dollars. You cannot just cancel without consequences. Naomi looked at him briefly, acknowledging the concern without absorbing the pressure. The consequences already happened, she replied. You just watch them. The words settled deeper than any argument could, because now it was not about money. It was about exposure, about what had been revealed in front of hundreds of eyes and thousands more watching through screens. Backstage, the intern finally found her voice again, this time louder, steadier. Her credentials are primary level, she said to the team around her. There is no override above that. The technician beside her exhaled slowly. That means this is not a shutdown, he said. This is a decision. Out on the floor, more phones lifted. Not to capture fashion, to capture accountability. Victoria's posture shifted again, her shoulders tightening as the reality she had resisted began to settle in. "You are overreacting," she said, but the words felt rehearsed, disconnected from the moment. "This was a misunderstanding. We can address it privately and continue the show." Naomi finally took a step forward. Just one, but it carried more weight than everything that had happened before it. The lights adjusted with her movement, subtle but undeniable, following her like the system itself recognized its source. "You made it public," Naomi said. "You used a microphone. You used a list. You used a room full of people to define who belonged and who did not." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out in time. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "So we will finish this the same way," she continued. The LED screen behind her flickered again, no longer blank. Lines of text began to form, clean and precise, visible to every seat in the room. Not branding, not promotion, information, names, access logs, timeline stamps, quiet proof of decisions that had been made before Naomi ever walked through the door. A ripple moved through the audience, sharper now, more focused. This was no longer a disruption. This was a reveal. And standing at the center of it, Naomi Carter was not just ending a show. She was showing exactly why it had to end. The screen did not rush. It revealed, line by line, name by name, timestamp by timestamp. The room leaned in without realizing it, drawn not by spectacle, but by precision. Naomi Carter stood just off-center, her presence no longer questioned, only processed. The LED wall behind her displayed a clean sequence of actions, each entry simple, undeniable. Access modified, guest list edited, primary credentials removed, authorization reassigned. The kind of details no one notices until they are forced to. A quiet gasp moved through the front rows as a familiar name appeared at the top of the list. Victoria Hale. Her access log expanded beneath it, each action tied to a moment earlier that evening. The exact time Naomi's credentials had been removed. The exact second the system had accepted the change. Victoria's face lost its structure. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough for the room to see the shift from control to exposure. "This is confidential system data," she said quickly, her voice stepping over itself now. "You cannot display this publicly." Naomi did not turn to her. She kept her eyes on the screen, watching the truth settle into the room the way it always does. Slowly, permanently. "It was confidential," Naomi said, "until it became relevant." The words landed without force, but they carried consequence. Around them, phones were no longer just recording. They were documenting. Every frame now held context. A sponsor near the aisle stepped back, creating distance not from Naomi, but from what was unfolding next to him. The intern in the control booth stared at the screen, her earlier hesitation replaced with something clearer. Understanding. She was removed. Manually, the intern said, louder this time, her voice carrying across the backstage space. This was not a system error. The technician beside her nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the data. It was intentional. That word traveled faster than any announcement. Intentional. Not a mistake. Not confusion. A decision. Victoria shook her head, stepping back once, then catching herself as if retreating would confirm what she was trying to deny. "You are taking this out of context," she said, but her voice no longer commanded belief. It asked for it. Naomi finally turned toward her, not sharply, not aggressively, just enough to meet her directly. "Then explain the context," she said. The room waited. 800 people, silent again, but this time not because they were unsure, because they were listening. Victoria opened her mouth, searching for something that could hold under the weight of what had already been shown. Nothing came out in time, because there was no version of this that could be reframed once it had been seen. Naomi took another small step forward, the lights adjusting with her again, subtle but exact. "You removed me from my own event," she said, her tone unchanged. "You instructed staff to deny access. You confirmed it with authority you did not have." Each sentence aligned with the screen behind her, matching data to voice, fact to presence. The room did not react loudly. It did something more powerful. It agreed. Quietly. Completely. And in that agreement, something else became clear. This was no longer about whether the show would continue. That question had already been answered. This was about what would happen next to the people who decided it could continue without her. And standing there, under a system that now reflected only truth, Naomi Carter was not raising her voice. She was closing a case. No one clapped. No one interrupted. The room held its breath like it understood something irreversible had just been placed on record. Naomi Carter did not rush the moment. She let it settle. Let every guest, every staff member, every camera absorb what had already been proven without needing to be repeated. Victoria Hale stood across from her, no longer directing anything, no longer the center of motion, just a figure caught in the stillness she once controlled. "This does not justify shutting everything down," Victoria said, her voice steadier now, but only because it had nowhere else to go. "At worst, this was an internal error. We can correct it and continue." Naomi's eyes did not harden. They clarified. "You are still calling it an error," she said, almost quietly, even after seeing the steps it took to happen. Behind her, the screen shifted again, not adding more data, but isolating it, highlighting the exact sequence. The removal, the confirmation, the enforced denial. Clean, undeniable. A pattern, not a mistake. A decision, not a glitch. A murmur moved through the audience, not loud, but unified. People were no longer asking what happened. They were recognizing it. A woman in the second row lowered her phone slowly, her expression tightening. "That was intentional," she said to no one in particular, but everyone heard it. Near the aisle, a man in a tailored suit shook his head once, quiet disbelief turning into distance. Victoria felt it happening around her. That separation, the kind that does not need to be announced. She straightened slightly, trying to rebuild a version of authority that had already been taken from her. "You are making this larger than it is," she said. "You are risking relationships, sponsors, reputations." Naomi took one more step forward, closing the space just enough to make the conversation unavoidable. "No," she said. "I am revealing what was already large. You just expected it to stay hidden." The words did not rise. They landed. Backstage, the intern leaned closer to the console, her voice gaining strength as understanding turned into clarity. "There is more," she said, scrolling through the system logs that were still visible to Naomi's level of access. This was not the first change tonight. The technician beside her glanced over, his brow tightening. "Show me." She hesitated for half a second, then projected the next sequence onto a side monitor, which instantly mirrored onto the main screen without asking for permission. Another set of entries appeared. Smaller, earlier. Adjustments to seating. Reassignments to access tiers. Subtle changes that shaped who moved freely and who did not. The room leaned in again, sharper this time. Because now it was not just about one moment. It was about a pattern. Naomi did not turn to look at the new data. She already knew it was there. "You did not just remove me," she said, her voice steady, controlled. "You decided who else would not be seen." That landed deeper than anything before it. Because now the audience was no longer outside the story. They were inside it. People began to look at each other differently. At the seating. At the structure of the room itself. Victoria's composure faltered again, just for a second, but enough for the shift to be visible. "That is standard event management," she said quickly. "We optimize flow. That is not discrimination." Naomi held her gaze. "Optimization does not erase identity," she replied. Silence followed. Not empty. Full. The kind that confirms what has already been understood. And in that silence, something else became undeniable. This was not just a show being canceled. This was a system being exposed. And Naomi Carter was not raising her voice to do it. She was letting the truth speak at full volume. The room did not return to normal. It recalibrated. Eyes that once skimmed now studied. Conversations that once floated now anchored themselves to what had just been revealed. Naomi Carter stood at the center of it all, not elevated, not spotlighted, but undeniable. The system behind her had stopped performing and started telling the truth. And the truth had structure. Victoria Hale felt the weight of it press in from every direction. Not loud, not chaotic, just steady. The kind of pressure that does not break you instantly, but leaves no room to stand the same way again. "You are misinterpreting operational decisions," she said, but the words sounded distant, like they belonged to a version of the night that no longer existed. Naomi did not respond immediately. She let the room hold that statement. Let it test it. Let it fail on its own. Then she spoke. "No," she said, calm and precise. I am reading them exactly as they were. Written. Behind her, the screen shifted once more, narrowing the focus. The earlier entries faded, replaced by a single timeline expanded across the entire display. Every adjustment, every reassignment, every quiet decision that shaped who moved freely and who did not. The pattern was no longer subtle. It was visible, clear enough that no explanation could soften it. A woman seated near the center leaned forward, her voice low but certain. "That is not random," she said. A man beside her nodded once. "That is selection." The words spread faster than anything Victoria could counter, because now the audience was not reacting emotionally. They were analyzing, and what they saw did not support her. Backstage, the intern scrolled further, her confidence growing with every confirmed detail. "There are flag notes attached," she said, her voice steady now. "Manual comments." The technician hesitated. "Read them." She swallowed once, then did. "Adjust guest visibility for brand alignment. Prioritize image consistency. Limit unscheduled access profiles." The room did not need interpretation. The language spoke for itself. Naomi closed her eyes for a brief second, not in frustration, in recognition, because she had heard that language before. Years ago, different rooms, different people, same tone. She was 22, standing in a showroom in Los Angeles, portfolio in hand, listening to someone explain why her designs were strong, but her presence did not fit the brand image. She remembered the way they smiled when they said it. Polite, certain, final. That memory did not stay in the past. It stood beside her now, silent but present, shaping the stillness in her posture. When she opened her eyes again, nothing in her expression had changed, but everything in the room had. "You called it optimization," she said, her voice soft but unmovable. "You called it flow, but what you built was a filter." Victoria shook her head quickly, stepping forward as if proximity could restore control. "That is standard language in this industry," she said. "You are isolating phrases without context." Naomi met her halfway, not physically, but in presence. "Context does not change. Intention," she replied. Silence followed again, not uncertain, settled. Around them, the audience no longer looked confused. They looked aware. Some lowered their phones, not because the moment had passed, but because they understood it now. And understanding does not need constant recording. Victoria's shoulders lowered just slightly, the first sign that resistance was giving way to reality. "So what now?" she asked, the question no longer defensive, but exposed. Naomi did not answer immediately. She looked around the room, taking in every face, every shift in posture, every quiet acknowledgement that something larger than a show had just been uncovered. Then she spoke. "Now," she said, "we decide what this space represents." And for the first time since the lights dimmed, the room was not waiting for a show to begin. It was waiting for a standard to be set. The question did not echo. It anchored. What this space represents. It was no longer a suggestion. It was a decision waiting to be made in real time, under lights that had already chosen their side. Naomi Carter stood still after saying it, not filling the silence, not guiding it, allowing the weight of responsibility to settle across every person in the room. Because now it was not just about her. It was about everyone who had watched, everyone who had benefited, everyone who had stayed quiet when the system worked in their favor. Victoria Hale inhaled slowly, as if preparing to step into a version of control that no longer existed. "This space represents excellence," she said, her voice measured again, reaching for something stable. "It represents brand identity, vision, consistency. That is what we built here." Naomi listened without interruption, not dismissing, not reacting, just letting the words reveal themselves fully. Then she answered, "Excellence does not require exclusion," she said. "Vision does not require erasure. And consistency should not depend on who you decide is visible." Each line landed with precision, not louder, but deeper. Around them, the audience shifted again, but this time not in uncertainty, in alignment. A man in the third row nodded slowly, arms crossed, his attention no longer divided. A woman near the aisle lowered her phone completely, her focus fixed on Naomi as if she was no longer watching an event, but witnessing a correction. Backstage, the intern straightened her posture, no longer hesitant, her voice carrying clearly across the team. System integrity is fully under Naomi Carter's authorization, she said. All operational decisions are now routed through her command. The technician beside her did not question it. He simply stepped back from the console. Because there was nothing left to operate. Only something left to acknowledge. Victoria's eyes flicked briefly toward the audience, then back to Naomi, searching for something that could shift the direction of what was unfolding. If you end this, she said, her tone quieter now, more grounded in consequence than control, you do not just stop a show. You impact hundreds of people. Staff, models, vendors. You collapse months of work. Naomi took that in. Not defensively, not dismissively, fully, because she understood exactly what it meant. No, she said. I protect what comes after this. The distinction settled into the room like something undeniable, because this was no longer about what had been built. It was about what would be allowed to continue. Naomi turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the runway, the seats, the lights, the structure she had designed from the ground up. Every inch of it reflected intention. And now, it demanded accountability. This space was created to elevate, she continued. Not to filter. Not to quietly decide who belongs before they even arrive. The screen behind her shifted again, the logs fading, replaced by a single line of text centered across the display. Not dramatic. Not decorative. Just clear. Event status. Suspended pending review. A collective breath moved through the audience. Not shocked. Not chaotic. But aware. This was it. Not an emotional reaction. A decision executed with clarity. Victoria's shoulders lowered completely now, the last trace of resistance dissolving into something quieter. Not agreement. Not yet. But recognition. You are really doing this, she said, almost to herself. Naomi did not look at her. This time, she looked forward. It was already done, she said. And in that moment, the room understood something that no announcement could have delivered. This was not the end of a show. It was the beginning of accountability that could not be unseen. The words did not fade after she said them. They stayed, hanging in the air like a final signature on something that could not be reversed. It was already done. The screen behind Naomi Carter held steady on the status line. No flicker, no hesitation, as if the system itself understood there was nothing left to process. Around the room, movement returned slowly, but it was not the movement of a show resuming. It was the movement of people adjusting to a new reality. Phones lowered. Conversations began, but quieter, more deliberate, shaped by what had just been made visible. Victoria Hale stood where she was, no longer trying to step forward, no longer trying to redirect anything. For the first time that night, she was still in a way that matched the room. Not in control, not in denial, just present with what had unfolded. There are procedures for this, she said after a moment, her voice lower now, no longer projecting, just speaking. Internal review. Formal reports. This is not how decisions are supposed to be made. Naomi turned her head slightly, acknowledging the statement without accepting its premise. Procedures protect systems, she said. Tonight, the system needed to be seen. The distinction settled quietly, but it carried weight. Because what had happened was not impulsive. It was precise. Every step had been controlled. Every response measured. The absence of chaos made it undeniable. Backstage, the intern removed her headset slowly, her hands no longer hovering, no longer uncertain. All external feeds are still live, she said, her voice steady. This has already been broadcast beyond the room. The technician beside her nodded once, not surprised, just confirming what they both understood. This moment was no longer contained. It had already moved beyond the walls. Out on the floor, a model standing near the runway edge shifted her posture, no longer waiting for a cue that would never come. She looked toward Naomi, not confused, not frustrated, but aware. A vendor near the back closed his tablet, his expression thoughtful, recalibrating expectations in real time. The ripple was not loud. It was deep. Victoria exhaled slowly, the last layer of resistance giving way to something more honest. You could have handled this differently, she said, not as a challenge, but as a reflection she was only now able to form. Naomi met her gaze again, not with distance, but with clarity. So could you, she replied. The simplicity of it left no space for argument, because everything that needed to be said had already been shown. Naomi took one final look across the room, not searching, not questioning, just acknowledging the shift that had taken place. The space was the same. The lights were the same. The runway had not moved. But what it represented had changed completely. She lifted her phone one more time, a small motion that carried the same precision as before. Another tap. The lighting softened further, no longer framing a show, but easing the room into closure. Not abrupt, not dramatic, just finished. The screen behind her dimmed slightly, the status line still visible, but no longer the center of attention. Because the decision had already been understood, Naomi turned, not in retreat, but in completion. As she walked, the space did not follow her this time. It remained where it was, holding what had been revealed. And for everyone still standing there, watching, processing, adjusting, one truth remained clear. This was not a moment that ended when she left. It was one that would continue long after the lights went out. The doors did not slam. They did not need to. Naomi Carter's exit was quiet, measured, almost invisible if you were not paying attention. But everyone was paying attention now. Every step she took away from the runway seemed to leave something behind that could not be undone. The space held her absence the same way it had held her presence. Fully, completely. And in that stillness, the consequences began to unfold. Not announced, not dramatic, just real. Backstage, access panels flickered one last time before locking into a new hierarchy. Names that once carried authority now returned error messages. Permissions denied. Credentials expired. The system was not reacting. It was resetting. The intern watched it happen in real time, her voice low but steady as she read the updates aloud. Administrative roles reassigned. Temporary suspensions applied. Audit review initiated. The technician beside her did not interrupt. He just listened, understanding that this was no longer a technical process. It was accountability in motion. Out on the floor, sponsors gathered in small clusters, their earlier confidence replaced with careful distance. Contracts were no longer just agreements. They were now tied to a moment that had already begun circulating beyond the room. One representative checked his phone again, his expression tightening as notifications stacked faster than he could read them. This was no longer contained. Victoria Hale remained where she stood, but the room no longer framed her the same way. The authority she carried earlier had not been taken by force. It had been removed by truth. She glanced toward the screen, now dimmed, then toward the entrance Naomi had just walked through. For the first time, there was no immediate response. No instruction. No correction. Just the quiet realization that control had never truly belonged to her. A member of the event staff approached slowly, hesitant, but direct. "What should we do now?" he asked, his voice careful, as if the wrong tone might trigger something else. Victoria looked at him, and for a moment, the question seemed to reach deeper than the situation itself. Because the answer was no longer procedural. It was personal. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that acknowledges something has ended. "We wait," she said, not as a command, as a reality. Around them, the room began to empty in a different way than it would have after a successful show. Not rushed, not chaotic, just deliberate. Guests walked out carrying more than impressions of fashion. They carried context. Conversations started that would not stay in this room. Stories that would not be edited before they were shared. And somewhere within that movement, something else shifted. Quietly. Respect. Not requested. Not announced. Earned. Naomi Carter stepped into the hallway beyond the main floor, the noise behind her fading into something distant, something already becoming history. Her phone remained in her hand, but she did not look at it. She did not need confirmation. She already knew. The system had responded. The room had understood. And the line had been drawn exactly where it needed to be. She paused for just a second, not to reflect, not to question, but to acknowledge the weight of what had just been done. Then she continued forward. No rush. No hesitation. Because for her, this was never about stopping a show. It was about ending a pattern. And back inside that room, where lights were dimming and voices were lowering, one truth remained, steady and impossible to ignore. The moment she was asked to leave was the moment everything changed. The hallway did not feel like an escape. It felt like distance. Not from the room itself, but from everything that room had allowed for too long. Naomi Carter walked with the same steady pace, heels soft against polished flooring, the echo behind her fading with every step. No cameras here. No audience. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that does not erase what happened, but confirms it. Behind her, inside the space she had just left, the reset continued. Not loud, not dramatic, precise. A senior coordinator stood near the now dimmed runway, reviewing a tablet that no longer responded the way it had an hour ago. Access restricted. Decision authority rerouted. Every tap returned the same message. Pending executive review. The system was no longer flexible. It was accountable. Victoria Hale remained near the center aisle, but the room no longer positioned itself around her. Staff passed by her without waiting for instruction. Vendors packed equipment without checking for approval. The hierarchy had not been dismantled with noise. It had been reassigned with clarity. One of the sponsors approached her again, but this time his tone had changed. "We will need a formal explanation," he said, measured, careful, already thinking beyond the room. Victoria nodded once, slower than before, absorbing not just the request, but the implication behind it. This would not stay internal. This would not be controlled by a statement. It would be examined. And for the first time, she did not reach for language to reshape it, because there was nothing left to reshape. Backstage, the intern sat down at the console she once hovered over, her posture different now. Not hesitant, not unsure. She scrolled through the final updates, her voice quiet but firm as she read them to the remaining crew. Full audit flagged. External compliance notified. Executive override locked. The technician beside her leaned back, arms folded, not in resistance, but in recognition. "It is done," he said, not as an opinion, as a fact. Out in the hallway, Naomi slowed for a moment near a glass panel that reflected just enough of her silhouette to catch her attention. She did not stop to admire it. She stopped because it reminded her of something older, something familiar, a version of herself years ago, standing outside a space she was told she did not belong in, looking at her reflection and questioning whether the room was right or if she needed to become something else to fit it. That version was gone, not erased, evolved. Her reflection now did not ask for permission. It did not adjust. It stood exactly as it was meant to. Naomi's expression did not change, but something in her gaze softened for a fraction of a second. Not weakness, recognition. Then it returned to stillness. Because this was never about proving she belonged. It was about proving that spaces built without truth do not hold. Back inside, the last rows of guests cleared, leaving behind a room that looked almost identical to how it began, but carried none of the same meaning. The runway remained. The lights still glowed faintly, but the illusion of control had been removed. And in its place, something far more permanent had settled. Accountability does not leave when people do. It stays. Naomi turned away from the glass and continued forward, her steps steady, unhurried, unchanged. Because what had happened tonight did not require applause. It did not require validation. It required one thing, a line drawn where it should have been, from the beginning. And now that it was, everything that followed would have to respect it.